Hi, I'm Paul Peterson.
I'm Chris Sun Liu. In part two of Tax and Social Policy, let's delve deep into social policy. Professor Peterson, some people have said that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. What is a Ponzi scheme?
A Ponzi scheme is named after Mr. Ponzi, Charles Ponzi, who lived around the turn of the 19th century, 20th century. He was the Italian immigrant who made money off other Italian immigrants by telling them that if they would give him money, he would invest it in some programs that generated a huge return on their investment. And he did pay people a large return, but he paid them out of the money that came in from other people. And so as long as he kept getting more and more people giving him money, he was always giving away what he promised to people. But eventually, people caught on and said, hey, I'm not going to give any more money to this guy. And then the whole thing collapsed and off to jail he went.
Who is an infamous Ponzi scheme artist that we know in the modern era?
Yeah, we thought Ponzi schemes were only something in the distant past, but Bernie Madoff did this with investors. These were wealthy people. He promised them, I'll give you a 10% return on your investment every year. I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it. And so people kept giving him more and more and more money until he had $50 billion to invest. And then when the financial collapse occurred in 2008, all of a sudden he didn't have any money to pay off that 10%, and people discovered that what he was actually doing was taking the latest money that people were giving him and using it to pay off the people that he owed the money to at the 10% level. So it was another great Ponzi scheme.
Professor Peterson, I'm still a little confused. What does this have to do with Social Security?
Well, how could Social Security be a Ponzi scheme? And some people say, well, that's not, it's really very different. But there are some Ponzi-like characteristics to it, because what has happened with this program and also with other policies is that politicians promise good things to people and give it to them right away. And then the pay for them is going to be later on by the next generation, by young people, people who don't yet have the vote or maybe haven't even been born yet. And that's something that can go on and on and on until a generation comes along that cannot continue to pay in or refuses to pay in. And that's the kind of a situation that we have with respect to Social Security.
Now, I'm starting to connect the dots here, but who first invented the Social Security system, and why was it designed so that the next generation would keep paying for it?
Well, you got to go back to the 1930s. And in the 1930s, people were pretty desperate. And an organization got going called the Townsend Movement. And they campaigned on the platform that the government should pay every older couple $200 a month. They said the country would get its economy going again because these older people would be spending $200 a month and stimulate the economy. Well, that seemed a little ridiculous to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but he knew he had to respond with something. So he came up with the Social Security law in 1935. And that law, which Congress passed, was very popular because people only had to pay a very small payroll tax, and it was going to be paid for half by the employer, half by the employee. And then the benefits would be received at the age of 65 for those who had worked for a certain number of years. And so initially, just a small amount of money could fund this program because there were lots of people paying in, and there were only a few people who were eligible for benefits in those early years.
So did Social Security work pretty well in these early years?
Well, it was very popular because you didn't have to pay much in, and you got some pretty good benefits once you reached the age of 65. And it didn't cost the government all that much because life expectancy was only about an average of 67. So on average, they only were paying benefits for 2 years after the age of retirement. And as a result, the recipients were getting much more back than they were paying into the system.
Can you give me an example or an idea about this? How you can receive more out of the system than you paid in?
You know, that's what makes it a Ponzi scheme, is because if you can pay in a little bit of money and get back a lot, there's something screwy about it, right? But that's exactly what was happening. As late as 1993, the typical couple over their lifetime of working were paying $173,000 into Social Security, and they were getting back in benefits during their retirement years, Medicare benefits and Social Security benefits worth $433,000. Well, you know that's not going to go on forever. That's just exactly what a Ponzi scheme looks like.
Now, when do problems start emerging with the Social Security program, and what are some of the factors that are causing this trouble?
Yeah, how come the benefits increased so rapidly that people were getting $433,000 worth of benefits after they retired? Well, that's because the benefits were being expanded year by year by Congress, which always wants to promise people some more benefits in the year that they're running for re-election. And then there was a big change when Lyndon Johnson signed the Medicare bill, which said that they would cover the medical costs for Social Security recipients once they reached the age of 65. And so here you see LBJ signing the Medicare law and Harry Truman becoming the first Medicare recipient.
And other things start happening to Social Security too, right?
Yes, indeed. Nixon indexes the benefits to inflation, so they're going to go up automatically every year. And then people didn't like that so well, so then they indexed them to increases in wages, and wages started increasing at an even more rapid rate. And so benefits started going up at an even steeper rate. And then more people were included in the Social Security program. Originally, if you worked on the farm or if you worked in somebody's home as a domestic worker, you weren't eligible for Social Security, but they were brought in as well. And then George W. Bush added the prescription benefit plan, still another Social Security benefit. Now, quite apart from all these policy changes, people were living longer. So instead of living to the age of 67 on average, they were living to the age of 80. Well, it takes a lot more money if you're going to support people for 15 years instead of for 2 years. And then there was another benefit that was handed out. People could retire at the age of 62. They'd have to accept a reduction in benefits, but this was another costly innovation. So lots of things were happening to make this very popular program increasingly at risk of not being able to pay its bills.
At this point, the strains on the whole Social Security operation are just mounting. Yet, the whole system doesn't fall apart. Why is that?
How did they keep the Ponzi scheme going? Yeah, well, economic growth can do that. So if you have economic growth at 3% a year, you can cover some of these increasing costs. So that was a big factor, that in the last half of the 20th century, the steep rate of economic growth helped to cover the costs. But beyond that, we had the baby boom. So you had all kinds of new people coming into the labor force. And you had very few people retiring because it was the people born in the 30s, a very small age cohort, who were the retirees. So you're getting lots of people supporting only a few people in the retirement years. And then you had women entering the workforce, a huge increase in the workforce that began in 1970, as it was thought that women did not have to stay at home. They didn't have to take care of the children. They could become fully engaged in the labor force, and that added a lot of new revenue to Social Security. And then finally, workers were agreeable to paying higher payroll taxes, in part because the economy was growing. So instead of paying just a tiny sum of money, they were paying as high as nearly 7% of their own money and another 7% of the employer's money. So with a 14% tax on the payroll, that generated a lot of revenue. So this all was working in such a way as to keep the Social Security Medicare system financially solvent.
But the risks that the Social Security system will collapse are pretty serious today. What are some reasons for this?
Well, all those good things that were happening have stopped. the baby boomers are now retiring, and there are fewer people in the workforce relative to the numbers that are retiring. Economic growth is much slower. We're growing at the rate of 2% in the 21st century instead of the 3% that was happening after World War II. The cost of medical services has risen rapidly so that it's now 20% of GDP. And workers are not willing to pay more than that 14% payroll tax. So we've reached the upper limit as to how much we can increase the payroll tax. So all of a sudden, those things that had been helping pay the bill are no longer going up.
Now, clearly we already have a lot on our plate to deal with, but to add to all of this, there's one fact of American politics that makes reforming the social insurance system even harder. What is that?
Yes, Chris. It's not just that the Social Security system is becoming an increasing problem. The biggest issue is that the political capacity of the country to deal with this problem is limited by certain political realities. And one key fact is that older people vote in much larger numbers than younger people do. So you see in this graph here that about 70%, 73% of those over the age of 65 are voting, as compared to as little as 40% among those who are in the age group 18 to 24. So yes, people who are over the age of 65 are willing to get out on election day, and they get out to vote because they know that if they vote, that helps to sustain the Social Security system.
Senior citizens are also extraordinarily well organized. How is that the case?
Well, they have an organization called the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP. And if you're 50 years or more, you're invited to join the organization. They like to get as many people identifying themselves as old as possible. And they give some benefits out to people. You can get certain health care benefits and other benefits if you join AARP. And they have 37 million members. Apart from churches, this is the largest organization in the United States. And it has one focus: keep that Social Security system intact, keep the Medicare system intact, keep the Medicaid system intact. So it is really a well-organized lobby that has a lot of political power. And I always like to show this Golden Age passport just to illustrate how much power they have. And I'm very proud of it because you see my signature on there. When I was about 55, I went to a national park and they said, do you want a Golden Age passport? And I said, well, I haven't reached the Golden Age yet. And they said, well, according to the Congress, you have. And they have passed a law that says that if you buy this card for $10, you will, over the course of your lifetime, be able to enter any national park or any national monument in the United States free of charge. And furthermore, everybody in your car can come in free as well. And it'll only cost you $10, and the entrance fee is going to be $7 otherwise. So for an extra $3, I got this card. And I've been going free into the national parks ever since. And then next to me comes this poor family of four, struggling in an old Ford. I just drive my Lexus in, of course. And they come struggling in their Ford, and they say, how much is it? And they say, it's $40 now, $10 per person. Kids, oh, we'll give you a discount of $1 for the kids. And so, yeah, this is the power of AARP. They're able to get the benefits for the elderly that you might say younger people with children deserve them more.
Now, what does the American public think about all these senior citizen programs and benefits?
Well, that's another secret to the situation, because everybody thinks that people who are over the age of 65, when they get benefits from the government, are doing nothing other than getting their fair share. So there's really very little criticism, even from young people, of the greedy geezers who are getting all these benefits. They say, yeah, no, they've earned it. They've worked hard all their life. Now it's their turn to relax and enjoy their golden age. So yes, no, this Social Security is very popular, and it's very popular not only among the elderly, it's also popular in the population as a whole.
Let's return to the social insurance Ponzi scheme. Looking forward, how bad does it look? What is the prognosis?
Well, is this going to get worse? Well, some people say if you project out where we are today into the future, we're going to have a Social Security program that's so expensive that we'll be able to pay for it only if we take 60% of everything that everybody earns who in the category that pays Social Security taxes, which is everybody's salary up to $100,000. We're going to have to take $60,000 out of that. Now, other people say that's a little extreme. I don't think it's going to get that bad. It's only going to be 40%. Well, currently it's 14%. So if it's going to go up to 40% by the year 2040, well, people aren't going to pay for it. It's going to go broke before we get there.
Solutions are just racing through my head right now. What if we relied more on the income tax then instead of the payroll tax to fund this Ponzi scheme?
Well, we could. We could instead try to get the money out of the more progressive income tax instead of relying on the regressive Social Security tax. But to do that, we'd have to take almost all of the money that's being generated by the income tax and put it into paying for these programs. There'd be nothing left over to pay for anything else. So whichever way you go, whether you go with the payroll tax or the income tax, you're going to be eating up a lot of resources unless you increase some taxes elsewhere.
Professor Peterson, how do we get out of this mess? What are some potential solutions?
You want me to solve this? Well,
yes, please.
It's going to be very hard to do. Politics is going to make it almost impossible to do. But there are reasonable Republicans and there are reasonable Democrats who have proposed some solutions. And so if you look at what the Republicans have proposed in their more reasonable moments, they say, well, let's gradually move away from the Ponzi scheme and have everybody contribute to their own retirement. And let's do it on a gradual basis, a little at a time, and build up personal investments in their private retirement accounts. So that's one thing that could be done. Secondly, we could say, we don't need to have everybody retire at the age of 65. We could raise the age of retirement. We wouldn't need to do it all at once. It could be done gradually. But as long as people are living now to the age of 80, we might say people should be working until the age of 70 or even 72. That might not be such a bad idea. After all, originally people worked within 2 years of their expected mortality day. So, yeah, you could say, without it being an extreme policy, that we should be raising the age of retirement. Or we should slow the benefit increases. We shouldn't have the steep inflation increases that we're currently having, or we could just moderate them a little bit. That would help a lot. So those are the Republican ideas. Now, the Democratic ideas are say, well, let's change the payroll tax so that we don't make it such a regressive tax. If everybody paid a payroll tax on all of their income instead of on just the first $100,000 of their income, this would not be a regressive tax. It would be more like a flat tax, and that would generate a lot of new revenue from the 1%ers and the 5%ers who are making more than $100,000 a year. Or we could fund more of Social Security out of the general revenues. We wouldn't have to do an extreme thing of taking it all out of there, but we could tax the highest income groups at a higher level. And then finally, we could try to control rising medical costs, and that's the hope of the Affordable Care Act. Whether that will actually happen remains to be seen. So what is the solution? It's probably a little bit of all of these. It's not going to come from any one source, but it's not an impossible problem to attack. It can be addressed as long as there's a political will to do so.
And we're going to have to tackle this issue at some point, right, Professor Peterson? we can't just avoid it. How big of a part of our budget is this that we're talking about?
Well, just to remind ourselves of the basic facts of the federal government, Social Security is about 25% of the total, and Medicare and Medicaid are about another 25%. So about half of the U.S. budget is now going for this set of programs. And so the reason why, when we think about federal social policy, we have to talk about Social Security and Medicare. The reason for that is that's just about the whole story.
And in the end, Professor Peterson, how would you summarize our discussion of social policy?
Well, you see this railroad here? There's the third rail in the middle. That's an electric rail. If you touch that rail, you die. Well, that's what Social Security is. It's the third rail of politics. If you touch it, you die. Any politician who tries to reform Social Security will lose the next election. That's what Barry Goldwater discovered, because he was the first to propose Social Security reform, and he was trampled. So you don't dare touch it, but if you don't touch it, the government won't be able to pay the bills. There you be. We have to figure out that puzzle.
And that's the end of Gov 30. Thank you, everyone, and good luck on exams.
Bye now.